All right, we're live.
Hi.
Hello, everyone. And you're the leader. Be our fearless leader.
Oh, crap. I'm supposed to lead?
You know.
Yeah, I know. Welcome to the first meeting of the Jenkins Pipeline Authoring SIG. The plan going forward is to have these roughly monthly. Well, I'm tentatively planning to do the next one in 3 weeks, so it doesn't overlap with KubeCon, because I know I'm going to be attending that, and probably others will as well, if we went for 4 weeks. Anyway, we'll talk about scheduling and such later. In case I hadn't already forcefully introduced myself to you at some earlier point in time, mainly Jenkins Worlds, since I have met most of you at one or the other of this year's Jenkins Worlds. I'm Andrew Bayer, or Andrew Bayer if you're European. I will answer to both. I'm an engineer on pipeline here at CloudBees, longtime Jenkins contributor, declarative author, and I guess I'm the lead for the SIG. Anybody else want to introduce themselves? Don't feel an obligation. You don't need to.
Hi, I'm Sam Vaynort. I'm the somewhat quieter partner in the pipeline endeavors. I do a lot of the stuff behind the scenes for the guts of pipeline and the nasty, gnarly bits that no one in their right mind would touch.
I can go next. My name is Marky Jackson. I work at SysDig as a software engineer. I am the maintainer of the Prometheus Jenkins plugin. Long-time listener, first-time caller. And yeah, that's me.
I'll go next. My name's Devon Guzman. I work at CloudBees. I'm also on the pipeline team, working in various areas, but generally lots of kind of miscellaneous maintenance on the pipeline side. That's all from me.
Hi, I'm Liam. I am not displaying myself right now because I wanted to stop in and say, yeah, here's the agenda. Here's the link. It's been posted in the Gitter channel on Gitter, and it's also posted on the calendar link, the meeting schedule, the scheduled meeting point for this meeting, so you can pull it from there. And I'm an evangelist at Jenkins evangelist at CloudBees. Next.
Okay. I go next. I'm Ivana. I work at T-Systems Multimedia Solutions in Germany, Dresden, and I'm developing the shared library for a couple of services.
I can go next. My name is Christian. I am from Norway, and I've been in multiple companies, and almost all of them working with Jenkins pipelines, and more often than not, I'm the one ending up being the main author on premise. So glad to be here.
All right, Austin or Bobby or Oleg, you're the remainers.
I'll go. Austin. My name is Austin Witt. I work at HomeAway, which is a business unit of Expedia.com. I have built most of the platforms and frameworks with which pipelines are delivered and used by our developers at HomeAway. And I'm looking to share the rest of that with the rest of the world.
Thank you. So, do you hear me, by the way?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, just don't see a make notification. So my name is Alec. I am Jenkins core maintainer, Jenkins ambassador, and actually an active pipeline user. So I'm here because I'm interested in more pipeline development, especially in library development, development tools, debugging, etc. So yeah, and I'm also a Jenkins JSOC org admin. So I'm also here to do in order to get some JSOC projects for this year.
Oleg always likes to get people sucked into getting involved with Google Summer of Code, just as a warning to you. I mean, heads up. No, I meant warning.
And general community awesomeness as well, like hackathons and stuff like that.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay, so it's only me left then, I guess. I'm Bobby. Let me quickly say hi. I work currently on the pipeline team at Cloudbees, but I've been doing various things in Jenkins throughout the years. Yes, that's it.
All right.
So just a quick note, if we're not actually at capacity, we are close to it. And if anyone has wanted to get in and introduce themselves, please do so on the Gitter channel. And we'll try and figure out ways to make this make it easier for people to get in next time.
Yeah, it is great to see this many attendees for the first meeting. So now I guess we'll which is Liam, who is going to talk about pipeline documentation, and I assume talk some about where its current state is and what we can do to improve it. But I'm guessing. Yeah,
your guess is as good as mine. I wanted to make sure that we had this item on the list to start with because it's one of the areas that I think it helps people author pipelines more often and more easily. And I wanted to just put this out here as a point. We've had actually a few contributions recently to improving the pipeline documentation, which has been cool to see. At the same point, going back and looking at them, people are adding things like, oh, right, these are things that we didn't fully smooth out and make great about the pipeline documentation when we created it. Things such as one example is we have a Jira ticket for this, figuring out what the names of things are so that we can talk about them consistently, whether something is a section or a directive or a parameter, or because just calling everything a block is known to cause confusion. So that's one example of things that we need to work on and try and figure out how to make better, such that people can have an easier time finding and running pipelines. I'm wondering if anyone else has any passion for writing documentation or interest.
Everyone that knows me will tell you that I do, though I would not necessarily ordinarily volunteer that as a descriptor of myself. Since you asked, yes, I am extremely passionate about quality documentation.
Okay, so
ditto on that from me.
Yeah. In my case, I'm really interested in developer documentation. So I've already started drafting a thing called Pipeline Doc, which is actually a Groovy doc, but for pipeline libraries. I'm not sure whether it qualifies for the documentation, but it's generally something I'm interested in.
Cool. I just wanted to kind of get a sense for what who would raise their hand for this and maybe get some initial ideas. The Groovy doc is an interesting point.
Pipeline doc, because pipeline libraries are not exactly Groovy.
And Groovy doc is actually its own little weird world anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, so effectively what my first prototype was based on Java doc, not on Groovy doc.
Right. Okay.
Which is kind of weird, I believe.
And
well, thank you.
I've already contributed some chunks into the pipeline documentation. I probably will continue to do that. Sorry, I was trying to find my appropriate tab.
So yeah, I figure everyone will be, since we're all interested in this, I figure there will be a general, like, oh, everyone's interested in doing this, but having a sort of a first people that are high on this list, the list of wanting to be involved, then that's good. Thank you, Sam.
If I may shoot from the sideline a rather noobish question, I got the Jenkins IO docbook pipeline web page open now, and for the life of me, just having scrolled up and down, I cannot see any link to a GitHub resource where to make PRs or edit button. Am I blind?
No, well, you're not blind, but you are. It is hidden. I can actually show you where it is. Right down here.
Currently, your screen is not pinned, so probably YouTube watchers do not see it.
Yeah. So what I was figuring is, as long as I keep talking and nobody else talks, they can actually see what I'm. They can actually see what I'm quoting.
Okay. Thanks. Found it.
Right. So it's not easy to find. It's and this was brought up at the Contributor Summit. Actually, I was like, it's not there. They're Daniel and several other people like, yes, it is. Yeah, making this something, making this better would also be part of that. So to improve this page, we should note that as, I mean, that some of this is general website improvement that would make the documentation better, and some of it is specific to pipeline. I think there's also been some mention of the left side with drop down, right side. Why do we have this multiple table of contents structure? As another, like, okay, it's general formatting of this thing should be improved. But
I rather like the right side table of contents. There are different levels of detail. Without the right side, I would be lost trying to navigate this site.
Fair.
Okay. So I would agree that they are useful, but a counter, like you were, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt, we're starting to say is that they could maybe be a bit easier to min-max so they don't take as much space.
Yeah, I guess the point I was trying to make about the right-hand side is it offers direct access to sections that have no direct access or index on the left. As long as that function is served somehow,
right,
that's fine. It doesn't have to stay exactly as is, but it does serve a navigational purpose to me that I would miss if it went away.
Oh yeah. So I mean, there's, for example, having all of these things on the right-hand side appear on the left would be another way to do this, but I don't know if it's possible to do that. So there's work to be done there. Anyways, cool.
One thing I think is worth bringing up in terms of the documentation is that there's two main, I guess divisions may be a little bit much, of the documentation. There's the stuff that, like the pipeline syntax page, like the getting started and using, et cetera, that are completely written by hand. They're, written for humans, by humans. And then there's the pipeline reference, which also shows up in things like the snippet generator or the inline help, if I remember correctly, that can let you see what all steps are available on your master and what all the arguments and their possible values are for all of those steps, which is ugly as hell, but because it's automatically generated from the help docs that are committed into Git for each of the steps, and auto-populating downwards for possible parameter values. And when there are things that themselves take parameters, then it's auto, recurses down further. And it's something that could definitely look better. So if there's that's something where it's a giant maze of noise right now, but I think it's worth remembering and taking into account, because that's I think one of the problems we have is discovery of steps and understanding how to use steps. And yeah, that's a pain. So just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, I mean, we have I tried to
pipeline steps references the the one in particular I'm talking about. Yeah, there you go.
So, okay, where is that?
That's
an interesting. Okay, dot pipe. Oh, okay, and it's outside of the handbook. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and while the front page isn't that bad, except for the fact that there's too many steps.
Well, let's go on forever here. Speaking of something that could use a table of contents, yeah.
And some of the steps will just be a goddamn nightmare because you end up clicking into something that, for example, takes parameters, build parameters, and you end up with just recursive monsters.
Right.
Yeah, and when you click on just the step, it only gets you to the plugin page instead to the step directly.
Yeah.
Oh.
Clicking the first one is not a. But if you click the last one inside the plugin, it only gets you to the top page of the plugin.
Right. So if I click on this one here, it still takes me to the top of that. There's no.
Yeah, that looks like there's a bug there in the anchor generation.
Oh yeah, I see it. There it is.
For what it's worth, I really like the snippet generator proper on a running Jenkins master as a way to discover and learn how to use steps. It is not deep linkable, but more than that, you probably couldn't possibly install every plugin in the world on one master and use that as a reference. But the mechanism by which the snippet generator UI is rendered and becomes into an interactive discovery tool for people, I wish that I could send people there instead of to the deep links on this documentation or to something like the actual interactive snippet generator. I feel like that would give them a much better start figuring out how to interact with and use the steps that exist.
That's an interesting point. Like, could we generate this pipeline steps reference, which means there is a point, there's somewhere where we actually have this information that it seems like there should be some way to load that into a web page that then behaves somewhat like the snippet generator.
Yeah, we'd have to build a one-off app, a separate app for it.
Yeah,
I think it could be doable.
Hard part is the snippet generator allows using actual objects in the JVM to render its UI. And so if you don't actually have one of the plugins installed and it's using some custom object as its data object, then you won't be able to fully render that properly. You probably, like, the code that runs the Jenkins snippet generator when a plugin is installed is probably the minimum necessary to actually do that. You don't maybe need the rest of a Jenkins master, but I think you do need the Jenkins framework in order for the snippet generator to correctly render in all cases. But maybe 80% of cases, you could probably do without that.
Right, and maybe the 80% case is still a win. That's an interesting idea.
I think one of the things you'd be missing a lot of is any kind of like default values generation or dropdowns or stuff. I think it would probably be non-trivial to get that working because it's just like arbitrary stapler methods that fill that in.
Yeah. You could maybe load up dummy values of the Jenkins core objects, like one dummy username and password credential. I mean, most dropdowns are going to be, I don't know, well, someone could survey and see what most dropdowns are. But yeah, you're right. And that goes back, that goes to my earlier point of without a running Jenkins master, it'd be hard to render it. And even in some cases, you know, maybe if it's some plugin that deals with authentication, maybe the snippet generator on the Jenkins master at your company has a useful dropdown. But there's no way that that's going to have any kind of, well, not no way, but it might be very hard to have useful, even reference dummy dropdown values. But yeah, definitely, I would prefer to send my developers to a live snippet generator than to this page.
Yeah, stuff like with tool or the build step will not be as useful because you need to actually have tools installed or other jobs to build. But yeah, the job DSL plugin, which I think you actually want to, I think it's the GitHub pages.
There you go.
Why was I pointing at my screen? Does have its, I think, a better UI for reference, and its playground is kind of interesting as well.
Well, in particular, because the job DSL is just Ruby and all of their stuff is they can basically run over it in a very consistent way. So it doesn't have that sort of like do anything you want stapler generation stuff. So
it's not as pluggable.
it's true. I mean, it has its problems, but I'm just saying, like, the way that it provides this, ability here is kind of, okay. So we could look at this as one example of like, hey, if we can achieve this, this is a...
I think the other thing that I see a lot of requests for, and it came out at Jenkins World Europe as well, was snippets of code that do some concrete task, kind of showing how to assemble something from different steps, which is like a higher level construct on top of just the steps reference.
Right.
Yes, which I think dovetails into our next subject of examples.
Perfect. Yeah. Let's move on to that.
So is it something like snippets we have in common pipeline? I mean, when you define pipeline directly in Jenkins?
So that's something to discuss in the context of examples. When you create a pipeline job, not a multi-branch, but a standalone pipeline job in the Jenkins UI, you can pre-populate it with Hello World. And I think there's another example there. That may be something that we want to look at adding better examples in, but we don't want to go too crazy with that. Changes would have to go through a Workflow CPS plugin release. They can just get bloated and ugly. And more users are not actually creating jobs through the UI. That way they're creating jobs through multi-branch. And so they may not actually ever see that. They may just, their interaction may just be with the Jenkins file itself.
IDE support for pipeline, by the way.
Yes.
Love to see that somehow.
As I say it literally every time that I'm talking in front of people about any of this, if anybody knows how to write IntelliJ, Eclipse, VS Code, etc. plugins, please help. There was a blog post that went up last week on Jenkins.io from someone who wrote a VS Code plugin to do declarative pipeline linting.
Yeah, there is also a plugin for that.
We need some canonical source of the signatures for all the steps so that the IDEs could autocomplete, which would be served by perhaps a solution to the documentation section we were just talking about.
So these things tie in together.
You point it to your Jenkins master, and then all that information is available. Sort of.
Just to be clear,
you haven't installed yet.
There's a general need for some sort of metadata that is exposed for describing basically how steps operate, independent of having it running on the master. Like that's something that's come up a couple of different times in a couple of different related areas.
just to be clear, we do have the GDSL file that is auto-generated, right? Or am I missing something? Has it been removed maybe?
No, it's there.
It's for scripted, and it's not great. And I never could get it to work on my IntelliJ setup, so I eventually just gave up on it. And I don't believe it's ever worked for Eclipse. The DSLD has never actually worked. But I could be wrong.
I tried it once in IntelliJ. It worked for me, but it was damn slow. It was like a half a second delay after every character I typed, so it was nearly unusable.
I had the same experience on IntelliJ.
I mean, the jelly file config files and the step descriptor Java object are kind of close to that. Maybe a bit hard to actually get out and into something else, but I think that's the closest I've seen to a canonical definition of static declarative definition of how a step works.
Yeah, I was thinking, in my ideal world that I am completely incapable of actually implementing, what I always thought would make sense would be something that talks to the Jenkins API that has information on each step, etc. We might need to expose stuff that is currently not well exposed, but is present. to be able to have the IDE plugins talk directly to Jenkins and say, hey, what steps are available? Can I on this master? What parameters are available, etc. And something similar for declarative.
I mean, heck, yeah, the snippet generator is doing the right thing. I just want that in my IDE instead of on a web page.
But I don't suppose we have anybody here who actually knows how to write IDE plugins. Yeah, that's what I was.
I have some experience with NetBeans and Eclipse. A lot with Eclipse, actually.
Okay, anybody here who has experience and has time to work on it?
Crickets. That's the only question.
Crickets chirp, off in the distance a lone coyote howls, tumbleweeds roll across the desert.
Yeah, right.
If any of you have friends who have worked on Eclipse, IntelliJ, etc. plugins, and you think might be interested in this sort of thing, that would be great if you could find a way to get them involved. Or if it's something that somebody would like to, spend some time on learning how to do it, that would be also very cool. I just haven't had the time to throw myself into that because, I have a job. Sadly.
Yeah. Bonus points for writing a debugger.
Well, we won't even talk about debuggers right now. That's for another agenda.
I mean, we had a proposal for that.
Yeah, I even proposed to write it 1 or 2 years ago.
I'm planning to have testability as one of the agenda items for the next meeting.
I mean, I had a way to do that.
But let's
and
so we are heading off into the weeds. They're very interesting weeds, and the forest is large. Let us continue on with our agenda. This is obviously like it's interesting that I had no plan for this. Thus, we now have like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's like 6 work items. Like, okay, what do we do next? Different directions we can take this. So more to be discussed here. Obviously, I'll try and.
Amen.
Yeah, but let's move on to the Jenkinsfiles examples and shared libraries and such.
So
if people are okay with that.
Yeah, so a lot of this came out of the discussions that we had at the Contributor Summit in Nice, where we were talking about how can people help contribute to the SIG and help improve the authoring experience without having to go write complicated plugins or test frameworks, which somebody here has written a test framework. I don't know who oh yeah, it's Austin. One of, I think, 3 test frameworks that are floating around now. But anyway, and what we ended up realizing was that one of the real challenges to authoring pipelines these days is that it's a blank slate. You can make things, it's not that hard to figure out how to make things work, but it's not as easy as it should be, and it's a lot easier to have a whole bunch of, the result is a lot of unique snowflakes, a lot of different ways of accomplishing the same thing without a really consistent standard. So people end up just saying, oh, well, this is what I found on Stack Overflow, so I'll copy paste that, or something like that. And that we've got hello world examples, sure, and there is the pipeline examples repo that no one looks at because we never did a good job doing anything with it, but it exists. So it feels to me like one of the first areas we can really make an impact is figuring out how we want to share examples, how we want to make them available to people and make them more easily discoverable, and how we want to curate those examples, how we want to decide what are it plays into best practices, but I think it's a preliminary step before we go full on defining best practices, saying, okay, how do we decide which of these 3 or 4 examples that people have put forward is the one that we want to bless, the one that we want to say, okay, this is the best example we've got. It's not that we want to necessarily reject other examples, but that we don't want to have 4 examples doing exactly, accomplishing exactly the same thing, but written in different ways if you don't need to. So, Austin, you seem to be itching to say something. You're muted, though. There you go.
Yes, I have unmuted myself. I think that whichever examples are chosen, rather than a collection of static files in a Git repository that somebody may or may not trust when they find them and notice a commit date 4 years in the past, they should all be live. There should be a dedicated Jenkins master or masters for these examples, and every example that is put forth to the world, someone can go and look at it having actually run, and perhaps actually run it themselves to complete the example from just here's some code that someone wrote, we're pretty sure it's good, to here's some code that someone's wrote, we're pretty sure it's good. You can see how it behaves. Does that seem like the starting point that you want to select for yourself? Does that seem like it shows you how to do the thing that you were trying to figure out how to do? I think that would be much, much more valuable than an alleged blessed collection of files just sitting in a repo somewhere.
So we could utilize new tools like Jenkins file runner or whatever to create quick demos if you want. Though if you want a demo with UI, it would be a bit more tricky, but it's still possible.
That definitely opens potential security gotchas. Anytime you let someone run something anonymously, I mean, obviously we can control it.
Docker
It's
can
just
tell
something
you
that has to be considered.
faster in it, run it on their laptop, but make it runnable, or the Jenkins file runner, but something so that they can see it actually very easily get to the point where they can see the thing actually doing what it claims to do.
No, that definitely is value. Sorry, go ahead.
So I don't know the Jenkins runner that Oleg mentioned, but how about a standardized Docker Compose with a default Docker file where people could add their own generators and just have, if you would like an extra make file with the default rules, make, run, or whatever.
Yeah,
but that would be something we would have.
Just going to suggest.
I
like that idea.
I have something that might be 3/4 of the way there for that. It's actually standing up a full environment with including build agent, master, repos, jobs, some sample code, which might be the starting point we need for something like that.
One caveat to that is that for anyone who would like Docker in Docker, which would be a natural consequence of doing this with Docker, if memory serves right, there's a couple of outstanding Jira issues that are kind of blocking best practices there. But yeah, I've also got examples of make files, Docker Compose files, Docker files, whatever that I could contribute with and have people mess around with.
Yeah, actually, Docker in Docker is a problem, but there are workarounds for demos. I pasted one link to the Gitter chat. It's a demo for Jenkins configuration as code, actually a demo for CI Jenkins IO and pipeline library development. It's the demo I use for developing Jenkins pipeline locally, etc. And effectively, it uses configuration as code to provision instance. It works around Docker and Docker, and you can just start it if you want.
That actually makes me think that we should redo your developing pipelines locally quick talk from Nice and record it at some point.
It's already recorded. I mean, it was at the Jenkins Online meetup 1 year ago. I'm going to repeat it because there are some updates. And I'm currently working on the Jenkins file runner based talk for that.
I'll find that link because I know I have it, and I'll send it to the mailing list. And I believe you did. We did get it on the Gitter channel a couple of weeks ago.
Mm-hmm. We're about just a little over halfway through the meeting here. I'm just gonna hop in here for a second. So anybody who's watching, if you'd like to participate, you can also jump on the Gitter channel. I live near a fire station. If anyone's hearing sirens, anyways. You can hop on the Gitter channel and get the participant link and join in. I think there's still one slot left. So.
Nope.
Okay.
Marcin, I'm sure I butchered that. Took the slot.
Okay. So, anyways, if nothing else, get on the Gitter channel and you can yell at us about things that way, and we can interact that way. So, anyways, continue.
So yeah, there's definitely, so that's one angle that I think we should definitely pursue, which is technical improvements to how people can actually consume the examples and try to get somewhere with them. But I want to loop back to the part that I was initially thinking. We can come back to this. I'm not saying we won't talk about this, but how we can both get people to contribute examples. I mean, I think probably the participants in the SIG are a great source of an initial pile of very good examples, but there's going to be common things that none of us are actually working on or none of us are doing. So how can we get people to contribute examples? And how do we curate them? How do we decide which examples are the ones we should go with? I don't have good ideas on the how do we get people to contribute examples. I've never been good at figuring out how to get people to contribute to things. The fact that 10 plus people have shown up for this is far and away the most successful community collaboration I've ever done. So suggestions are definitely appreciated there. And my thoughts in terms of the curating is that we have probably a Git repo somewhere or a section of the docs pages or something where we actually contribute examples, because I think that we should not just have the dynamically executable examples, but we should have the examples on the web so they're searchable, et cetera, and so that they can have some description of what they're doing and why. So it's not just here's a Git repo that has a bunch of examples in it with maybe some comments, but a paragraph or two of here's why this is being done this way. Here is why I chose this approach over another, and things like that. So I was thinking that we could have a group in Git, an alias in GitHub that we could drop on reviews for contributors to the SIG to discuss whether a particular example is the right way to go, and try to have a consensus. So we don't just take an example if just one person says it's good and nobody else says anything, or we don't take an example if there's no consensus that it's a good example. I know maybe I'm throwing a little bit too much bureaucracy up front, but I think that, again, if we look at the pipeline examples repo, there's a fair number of now admittedly stale examples there, but they're just throwing at the wall, and the signal to noise ratio is not necessarily positive. Go ahead.
What could help with keeping that quality up and minimizing bureaucracy is maybe a little bit ahead of time, but probably mostly emerging from that review, a set of general guidelines or standards, things, addressing to pick one common example, stage node or node stage, when ought you do one or the other, that kind of thing, or general shape your pipeline this way. A set of standards would help guide new examples and would test our understanding of what we think actually is good. I think most of those would probably emerge from the reviews that you suggested, and I think that's a really cool idea.
Cool. Does that sound like something others would be interested in contributing to, both in terms of contributing examples yourself and in terms of reviewing and discussing examples that are contributed by others?
So, sorry. I think that I would definitely be interested in participating in that. I also think that we need to encourage contribution, we need to make the friction related to contributing examples as low as possible.
Yeah.
And these curation and high quality content and low friction often do not go hand in hand.
That is true. But I think it's important. I could be wrong. Like I said, I could be overdoing it.
No, I agree with your point. I think that I agree with your point about the examples. GitHub repo, it has a lot of info, some of which is out of date, most of which is underdeveloped. But each of those examples, I think, could be a good kernel for like each one of those could be an article unto itself. Like talking about how do the most common thing I have been asked at conferences and anywhere else is, how do I do GitHub notifications? We've seen this come up on the Gitter channel, on the Jenkins help Gitter channel and elsewhere multiple times. Like, how do I do notifications? And each time I'm like, well, here's the blog post that I wrote 2 years ago that's still completely appropriate to this. So in one sense, there's the discovery aspect. We also, I think, the other side of this, there's a third point, which is how do we make it easy to contribute? How do we curate it? And then how do we make it discoverable?
Yeah.
I think the curation would improve that, but there's some gap there as well.
I think we've worried a little bit too much about curation over time, and I think that the result has been that we have a lot less comprehensive documentation than a lot of other places, unless you count blog posts where people don't really know how to assess if they're still current or not. So I would lean as much as possible on the side of being more permissive in general at this point, and the effort to get the content up there. And then once we have more of a body of content, focus on kind of trying to clean it up a bit more.
If community can also participate in identifying and rating the quality of the content, in addition to just submitting it in the first place, that might do something to help control the quality over time. You know, a rating system, upvote, downvote, or something like that, to where when something goes out of state, one of we 10 doesn't have to notice. Maybe 5 people find it and it doesn't work for them, and they indicate that this isn't good anymore.
I mean, ideally that would be something like a wiki where you can flag it for admins to review. But we did have a wiki for Jenkins. Just throwing it out there.
Yeah, but we've tried various attempts at upvote, downvote for like plugin releases and things like that. And there's been some value in that, but not, I think, enough to have merited the effort that we've had to put in.
I agree with that. I think there's
But
that's a good example of a system that offers it. Stack Exchange and the Stack Exchange family is another kind of family that offers a kind of a more streamlined approach to it. But I'm not sure if it's. I wonder if it's worth standing up a dedicated Stack Exchange site for Jenkins or not. I would have questions if it's. I don't know. Like, I literally don't know what the admin overhead is like for that. I have no idea.
Perhaps worth finding out the answer.
Indeed.
I'd be willing to join testing on that.
cool. So that's one possibility. One sec.
So there's some notes being taken here, just FYI, so people know that like there's pausing and people kind of are processing on what we're just talking about.
Yeah, because I never remember anything if I don't write it down. I
Yeah,
don't
exactly.
actually need to look at it again, but if I don't write it down, I will never remember it. So I think that in terms of discoverability, the first thing we need is a landing page. It's right now we've got, even if we're just talking about stuff that is, supposedly from the Jenkins community and not scattered off on Stack Overflow or something like that, we've got the pipeline examples repo, we've got bits of examples inside the pipeline syntax reference, other stuff in the Jenkins.io docs, and blog posts. But we don't have one place that's the point where you go, here's where you go look to find examples and to find how do I do X. Regardless of what content's in there, we just don't have that place to start.
As a first level solution, we might simply look at linking to appropriate sections of those other resources within a top level page, since that's the low effort, high gain approach.
Yeah, definitely. With probably a little more detail, maybe, you know, again, the 1 or 2 sentences saying what we're linking to rather than just a page of, you know, https://hell.
Here, go to this random page for all the goodness and wonderfulness and win.
Yeah.
With no explanation of what that win is.
A good sales pitch on that landing page for this is what this page is for and how continuing to read it will benefit you, I think is important to distinguish this from the cornucopia of additional, similarly styled and otherwise Jenkins-related pages that exist on the internet.
Yeah. I think that's definitely the first, the necessary first step for discovery, and probably the necessary first step, now that you guys have all brought this up, to the encouraging contribution and curation and demoability. Is that we might as well start with the scattered information we have now and just have somewhere you can go find where to find all of that scattered information there. Which I guess means both that we need to go through the, you know, the Jenkins sites content and through pipeline examples and perhaps through Stack Overflow to find the content that already exists that's worth putting up there, and that we need to generate, actually write that page and populate it, etc. That sounds like a good first step.
And I've taken a quick Google at Stock Exchange, and it looks like that's a little bit more problematic because that's sort of centrally managed, and we have to put together a pitch and proposal and get it approved from them. So that might be something that's a long-term project that we could do, but I'd say we should probably focus on working with what we can get quick wins on. Unless we want to kind of co-opt one of the existing Stock Exchange pages like DevOps.
Well, seeing as this is a open source volunteer interest exchange or effort, why just a random idea would be to ask Stack Exchange for a promotion or having them pay for a Teams service. They had this huge deal about Teams before the summer. One that everybody could access freely without any accounts, well, beyond the Stack Exchange account, I mean.
That's definitely an interesting idea. So I want to circle on, there are a couple of things that we mentioned that I've added to the notes here, but also so the low friction contribution for something like a wiki is great, but it leads, and the same thing happens, I think, with GitHub pull requests are okay. Stack Exchange, you get this as, but you get both with Wiki and Stack Exchange, you get this problem of things going stale, and the onus for keeping things up to date is not on the person who posted the or who made the change, but on the people that are still there, right? So it leads to drive-bys where someone, oh, I want to talk about this, I've said it, I run off. And that's the curation side of that problem. I know that I see what you're saying, Sam, about like it's important that we have the information, but we did have a wiki, you're right, and what that led to was a sort of a pile of foo rather than a directed structure that actually had a strong guidance and sensibility to it. So there's a balance. I think we need to have that ability for people to do those drive-bys and to have, kind of, or to do smaller contributions that don't require a lot of effort on their part. But we also need to balance that against the effort required to maintain that, what is essentially code.
Maybe we could set up a plan of every 3 or 6 months going through the examples, and somebody from the SIG saying, okay, yep, this example is still valid. Just a quick yes, no, and then if it's not still valid, can it be modified to be valid?
Sort of a flag structure where you just sort of go through and flag it and say, okay, this needs attention, right? Having some way to automatically test these to make sure they still run would be great too, as was being pointed out, I think, as well. So, but yeah, some way to just like flag, like again, human process of, okay, we're just going to flag this.
Yeah, there's two kinds of validity that you want to care about, right? One is does it even run at all anymore, which unit testing or other testing frameworks can answer. And the other one is this semantically valid to advise people to do anymore? Is this pattern still good? And that's the one that's going to be harder to figure out and require maybe a human to look at it.
Yeah. And not just a human, but someone who is more familiar with pipeline, and so it is that particular aspect is one that we can't farm off to. Hey, anybody can come tell us whether or not this is semantically correct. They're like, well, it runs.
If you've got that group of reviewers accepting examples in the first place, just kick them back into that group and have them review it again.
Yeah.
And whatever the process is for trusting that authority to say something is good, we've already got that established. Just, hey, take another look at this for us.
Yeah, take advantage of the fact that we've got this at least initial core of enfranchised pipeline users, so maybe not full-blown power users, but we've got pipeline devs, we've got people writing rather advanced pipelines and extensions to pipelines, and people who are just writing pipelines but are interested in the art of writing pipelines, shall we say, and in improving them. It's a good. I think it's a good group to take advantage of, and I think we should do that.
Maybe make that one of the sort of a continuing agenda item of like, okay, today we're going to talk about two to three examples. We're just going to walk through them. These are the three. We'll read them beforehand, and then if you have any comments, we can discuss them during this meeting each time. I think that'd be a great way for us to also sort of spread the expertise that's present in the room to a larger audience and we'd have a video of it and be able to talk about things that way. But I think that'd be really interesting.
One question I would have about runnability testing is that a lot of these snippets, to do something meaningful, they have to interact with an external system, like running a request or deploying to a repository. So that's going to be a little trickier. Docker is good. I've done a lot with Docker, but it's not a silver bullet for that. You still have to configure containers for those pieces, and not all of those. Like if you're deploying to Artifactory or something, or Nexus, you're not necessarily going to have a freebie container that you can throw in there.
One potential solution for that, I know that Pragma has a lot of example repos on GitHub that they keep using as example demos for their customers, actually building a Gradle app or Maven app or whatever, and then having a Artifactory or Nexus Sonatype Docker container receiving this binary and trying to pull from it and exemplifying a deploy. Maybe that could be a way to go. I don't know, throwing it out there.
That's interesting. I didn't know about that. I have an example repo in that one that I linked earlier, but it doesn't include things like Nexus or Artifactory to go with that. If they're friendly to playing with that, external systems playing with that, that might be a really good option.
All right, so I'm going to give this a 5-minute warning here real quick. Sorry to jump in. We are coming up on the hour. And
for pay only, or behaves significantly differently when you pay for enterprise systems, yeah, that is a problem. But Docker plus using GitHub.com instead of GitHub Enterprise, using Docker, some public Docker registry, I think a large percentage of those external system interactions could be orchestrated to have something useful. And maybe it has to OAuth somehow as you, like, hey, this is an example of how to write to Artifactory. If you've got an Artifactory that you have access to, you can try this example. But there is definitely ground to be won there, even in those cases, I think. And certainly trying to try.
Yeah. Agreed. Thanks, Austin. Yeah, we're coming up on the end of the meeting slot here. I think we've covered a lot of ground, and I just want to make sure that we've finished up our discussion in terms of making sure that we have the next meeting scheduled and have some ideas on what we're going to do next. Obviously, we've started gathering information here. So,
yep. So I definitely want to touch on testability as our sandbox topic for next time. In part because otherwise, I think Austin might hunt me down, steal my skin, and pretend to be me to take over and have that topic of discussion. But also because
dark, dude.
Yeah, I'm dark. That's who I am. The last 3 Jenkins Worlds that I've attended, the 2 this year and last year's in San Francisco, all featured at least one talk on a test framework for pipeline. So that's 3 different test frameworks that are floating around, plus Jenkins file runner, plus this, plus that. So I think it's great that that many people want to make testing and testing of pipelines and shared libraries a viable thing. I think it's less great that there hasn't been a lot of collaboration across these efforts, and I'd like to try to unify those and focus efforts in one direction together and get it documented, get it into Jenkins CI org, etc., so that it can actually be used by people besides the authors, and isn't dependent on just one contributor or one set of contributors at a specific shop continuing to be active on that project. These standard open source challenges. So definitely that's worth thinking about. I think that's going to be a really great conversation. I'll make sure to ping the other contributors to testing frameworks to try to make sure that they can show up too. And then obviously we'll have follow-up on the documentation and examples discussions for this meeting, but I'll also be sending out emails to the mailing list proposing possible next steps to try to get some kind of forward progress by next meeting. Because otherwise it's easy to just have meetings every month where we talk about how we should do something. And then, since we are at closing time, next meeting, how about December 5th, same time? Does that sound, if that sounds viable to people? I mean, we'll still obviously send out emails, etc. Tuesdays are not great for those of us on the pipeline team at CloudBees because we have our team stand up on Tuesdays and Thursdays at the same time as this meeting, which is why I am suggesting maybe Wednesday. But I'll throw up a doodle, I think it is, for choosing a day. But I think this time seems to be good.
Maybe we could do it a bit earlier because Jenkins security team members have meetings regularly at 5 p.m. UTC.
All right, well, we'll do a doodle and about which day is best, and then we'll nail down which time is best in that day. Because I think it is, I know that this is not the most pleasant time for Pacific time zone people, but I want to make sure that we can include
Yeah, screw those guys. Whatever.
I was being nice to you. And as an ex-Pacific time zone person, I also understand. But I think it's really important and valuable that we have Europe involved as well. It's a shame that we can't also have East Asia involved, but the planet is a globe, sadly. And so I think that probably is a good place to start. I'll send out doodles and emails about that. But yeah, I think we're wrapping up. Thank you all very much for attending and or watching and participating.
Andrew, thanks for organizing this.
No problem. And Liam, thanks for actually clicking the right buttons to make this happen.
Click button, done. All right.
Hey, it's still a button that I didn't know how to click. So.
All right.
So yeah, thanks again, and I'll see you all on the channel and on the mailing list and at the future meetings. Thanks again, everybody.